There have been leaks, and the data held by the intelligence of the Tau machines is available to the world. I want to mention that the leaks that have been appearing on Reddit and X, formerly known as Twitter, and Facebook and other internet places are not the full picture. We don't know of any changes to the army rule, for the greater good, though there are not meant to be. Several units are expected to disappear off to legends, like Aun Va and Aun Shi. The leaks don't show pathfinders, but they're expected to still be there, and we don't have a Vespid profile, but upon closer looking and some helpful comments, thank you to those people, they are mentioned in regards to other units not being able to transport them. So Vespids should be safe. Then hopefully they will get new models in a kill team with more than one weapon option. This may seem strange that I, the Genestealer cult and Sister of Battle and Deathwatch player, is talking about Tau. But you know, I'm something of a Tau player myself. I have Daleth Sept and have like 10 models. Definitely know what I'm talking about. So tactical advice wise, little pinch of salt, but I'll be doing my best using my general knowledge of playing 40k. That's a disclaimer. If you know a Tau specialist YouTuber, then you can go to them for better advice. There are only 4 detachments showing in the leak. Kauyon we are familiar with, Mont'ka that has had its own leak, the Retaliation Cadre, which is battlesuit focused, not just the Crisis Battlesuits, but all of the Tau Empire battlesuits. This has been mentioned on the Warhammer community. And we have the Kroot Hunting Pack that has been shown off on Warhammer Plus, where the Kroot fought Catachans in a battle report. Though perhaps the reason they were fighting all guard infantry was because then you don't need to worry about displaying the absolute lack of anti-tank that an all-Kroot army has. If there are only 4 detachments, which looks to be the case, that is the smallest number out of any codex that's been shown off. Necrons and Admech, they got 5. The Dark Angels, yeah, they got 3, but they are a codex-like supplement to the Space Marines, and they can use the 7 detachments available in the Space Marine Codex. So Dark Angels players technically have 10 detachments. But Tau players shouldn't think they're getting the short end of any stick. I mean, that'd be the squats. The detachments they've got are looking pretty good. And as it's nearly 1 year of Christian von Carmian making YouTube videos, I thought I could go back to the basics and roll out the PowerPoint slides and my original model to display the information we talk about with the detachments. We are starting with Kauyon. You know it. You maybe enjoy it. It has barely changed. It's pretty good for all of the different kinds of units. There has been a slight change to the detachment rule. It now gives you sustained hits when shooting the spotted target. Technically, and there were quite a lot of technicalities with the Tau Index, but under the Tau Index, a unit could be guided and then not even fire at the spotted target and still get the bonus sustained hits. This narrows it down to the spotted target only. That's where you get your sustained hits 2. Otherwise, from battle round 3 onwards, you are getting sustained hits 1 on all of your shooting. It's range weapons only, but it can still affect things like the Kroot because they are Tau Empire. The enhancements. There are 3 familiar and 1 new one. We still have Exemplar of Kauyon. That gives you the sustained hits a turn earlier, so on battle round 2, just the same as the Index. And this is something you would want on a battlesuit commander coming in from reserves on turn 2 with a unit of battlesuits. Probably not ones equipped with flamers. And they're going to be shooting up the place with whatever kind of new battlesuit unit you like. There is the enhancement Patient Hunter. The bearer, just that model, gets +1 to hit, and from battle round 3 onwards also gets +1 to wound. This is something you will also want on a battlesuit commander who has a whole bunch of guns. The battlesuit commander options are the same as the Index. They still have a wide range of options. The enhancement Through Unity Devastation. While the bearer is an observer, the guided unit gets lethal hits against a spotted unit. Now you can't put this on Shapers because they couldn't use For the Greater Good anyway, but it probably works best on a Fireblade that is holding at the back, and then they can help out tanks and other larger battlesuits, and it will be especially useful on the Starscythe battlesuits with burst cannons to get a lot more wounds through. Those suits are getting -1 AP damage as long as you don't shoot at vehicles or monsters. That is their new unit special rule. So sustained hits and lethal hits and AP, there's your big combo. That's what you want. The issue is, it means getting the line of sight correct, it means having the right unit to take advantage of it. There's a lot of forward planning for it to work, but it can work very well. The brand new enhancement is Solid Image Projection Unit. This can be taken by the Kroot Shapers. There are now 3 kinds of Kroot Shapers. It lets you redeploy up to 3 units and you can put them back into reserves. It even lets you exceed the reserves cap. The Kroot Trail Shaper already lets you do this with his unit and another Kroot unit. You could combine the two together for 5 units moving around and have the ultimate refused flank. No units on any flank or on the board at all. You probably wouldn't want to do that. In past editions, Kroot have won battles before by just swarming the table and preventing deep strike and reserves from happening. At all. You win the game by default. But in an Uno reverse situation, you wouldn't want that to happen to you, but it is possible it could. I would still have some units on the board. So the Pure Tide Engram Neurochip that let you double up on a stratagem use, that is gone. But only gone from the Kauyon detachment, not from the Codex. We're going to see it come back up in the Retaliation Cadre, which is all battlesuit focused. The stratagems, 4 of them are the same. Others have also been sent to that Retaliation Cadre. Anything battlesuit related is now in the battlesuit detachment. For stratagems, combat embarkation is the same. It lets you hide in a metal box from enemies charging you. So if your breaches jump out, they make a mess of an enemy unit. If they were about to get charged, well, they would die and you would lose the objective anyway, so you can get back inside your vehicle and then you should be safer. An alternative in that situation is the photon grenades. They are the same as before. They make an enemy unit have -2 to their charge roll. It also potentially battle shocks the enemy, so that if they failed their battle shock test, they wouldn't be able to take an objective from you, even if they did manage to kill all those breaches. Most enemy units can do that. Tau don't like close combat. If you're new to Tau, don't put them in close combat. Coordinate to engage is the same stratagem. +1 ballistic skill, and if you have the marker-like keyword, you also get to ignore cover. The benefit of cover is a very common thing to have in 10th edition tables, so being able to ignore cover, very useful. For the units that have the marker-like keyword, I don't believe any more units have gained it, I don't believe any units have lost it. The point-blank ambush stratagem. It gives you bonus armor penetration. This is good, but not in the first 2 battle rounds. You have to be a patient little hunter, and then when the enemy is already breathing down your neck, then you can shoot them with additional armor penetration. Okay, so what has changed? Strike and Fade has been removed. This let a battlesuit unit move after shooting. It was 2 command points. It is now in the battlesuit dedicated detachment, and it is called the Torch Star Gambit. That was shown off recently on Warhammer Community, and now look at it in that detachment. The stim injectors for a 6+ feel no pain is also dropped and flies off with the battlesuits to the Retaliation Cadre. So what do we have instead? There is a Tempting Trap. Now that is a battle tactic stratagem. You choose an objective that is not in the enemy deployment zone and one of your units. When you shoot at an enemy unit on the objective, you get +1 to wound. So this can be used on Kroot, but it is only for shooting. And much like the point-blank ambush, you can't use it in the first or second battle round. It will be helpful for clearing bigger enemies off objectives in the mid-game. Maybe with battlesuit support. And Wall of Mirrors is the other new 10th edition stratagem, back from the past. But rather than doing anything weird and shenanigan-y where you can't shoot certain things and suddenly lone operatives popping up all over the place, it is used at the end of the enemy fight phase, and it is for stealth suits, the Ghost Keel, or Shadow Sun. You leave the board, and you come back in your next turn from strategic reserves. We see this in a lot of detachments. It's very useful for getting you around the table to help perform secondary objectives and surprise enemy units. So this detachment as a whole, there are many positives. It is pretty easy to use, and all of your different units, whatever you pick, will have some valuable place in this detachment. It may be the closest you can get to mechanized Tau if that is your style. It's very popular in 10th edition because transports are tough and not too many points, and they can use the faction stratagems. We are no longer in 9th edition of having the core keyword, which locks some units out of stratagems. But there are quite a few negatives compared to the other detachments. Now, mechanized Tau may also want to use the Mont'ka detachment, as you will see. The first 2 turns are when you need to be laying down the firepower. That is when the enemy is going to be at a distance. That is how you start the game. You have most of your units on the table then, you want to get the most out of them, and this detachment does not support you in doing so. 2 of the stratagems can't be used in the first 2 battle rounds. You don't get your sustained hits coming in until the 3rd battle round. As players are not necessarily finishing a game, or only getting 4 turns of a tournament game, you're losing 1 of your turns, or more, when your special rule is in effect. Perhaps you lost that turn through being dead. This is definitely a drawback to the detachment. And while it was an all-rounder kind of detachment in the index, it is no longer the best for battlesuits. A commander in a cold steel suit or enforcer suit and the exemplar of Kauyon enhancement can be good, but an infantry or mechanized Tau list is what suits this detachment. This is not the all-rounder. There is no longer an all-rounder detachment. Now let's look at a detachment that does it the opposite way around. You get in first, you do your alpha strikes, you hit hard. This is the Mont'ka way of fighting. Mont'ka means the killing blow. It is about the first strike, and in the first 3 battle rounds you get lethal hits. And while your unit is guided under the greater good army special rule, you also get the assault as a keyword on your weapons. So since Tau players get assault, and one of the stratagems will give you a bonus to armor penetration, this is like having the Adeptus Mechanicus army special rule, but as a detachment rule. At the same time, you also get the Imperial Guard detachment rule, but without the restrictions of having to remain stationary. While it is only in the first 3 battle rounds, as we have said, sometimes that is just how long the game lasts, or how long the most important part of the game lasts. That seems a little bit too strong compared to the others. And I think a lot of Tau, with general Tau Empire armies not specializing in one particular thing with their lists, they will come to this detachment and have a good time. There are 4 enhancements. The first one is another exemplar. Exemplar of the Mont'ka. And just like the exemplar of Kauyon gives you an extra earlier turn of the detachment rule, this gives you an extra turn of the Mont'ka in the 4th battle round for their unit. Because there is no great benefit to having this in the 4th battle round, unlike how an early Kauyon strike works in the 2nd battle round, I would probably pass on this enhancement. It is only the 1 unit, and you have to hope that your unit is still alive in battle round 4 for this to ever come up. If it is cheap, then I can see it being used as a points filler enhancement. Strike swiftly is the next enhancement. 2 units within 6 inches of the bearer get Scout 6. If you're playing a smaller game, or you didn't want transports, or you couldn't afford transports, or you don't have transport models, this is the budget alternative. It can be quite useful for breacher units to get up the board quicker. I like it for another reason. It lets your big guns hide. It can only be used on 2 units within 6 inches of the bearer, but there are no limits on those units. Hammerheads, broadsides, it all works. You could just have them out in the open and ready to shoot the enemy on the first turn with their heavy keyword weapons. If you don't get the first turn, then they scout out of line of sight and hide. I like it. Strategic Conqueror is an enhancement that lets you pick 1 objective marker. Any objective marker. As long as the bearer of the enhancement is on the table, add 1 to objective control of models on that objective. This is useful if you have a Fireblade at the back who is mostly safe and gonna stay safe for the game. And it can let you get higher objective control, but what I find is enemies are either dead or they're going to be on an objective, and unless you're going to send in Kroot, who would still benefit from this, Tau don't want to charge the enemy very often. If it is a cheap enhancement, yes. Otherwise, I would pass. Breaches are already objective control too. If you're wondering about the points, it will be a few more weeks after the release of the Tau Codex that the points are known. It has become standard in 10th edition for the points listed in the Codex to be immediately considered redundant, and the April's points patch will take precedent over any points listed in the Tau Codex. The final enhancement is coordinated exploitation. Kroot Shapers cannot have this because they can't use the greater good, and this is all about the greater good. While leading a unit and acting as an observer, weapons in the guided unit have sustained hits against their spotted target. So this isn't just a flat bonus, you have to work for it, and it will only work on 1 enemy unit. If you weren't sure if you wanted to go Mont'ka or Kauyon, this allows you to have a bit of both. Having sustained hits and lethal hits means that if you roll a critical hit, which is almost always a 6 to hit, then that hit would auto-wound the enemy, and in addition, you would get 1 extra hit dice that you would have to roll to try and make a wound on the enemy unit. It's neat, but you do need to do a bit to get it to work. My Tau opponents use Fireblades in units to do the spotting, and since strike teams, the regular Fire Warriors, just got a better special rule, mentioned in my previous Tau unit video, a Fireblade with strike team could be the place for this. But other than strike swiftly, I can't see a tactic forming around the enhancements, just that they can be extras if you have the points. There's something for your consideration. We have another 6 stratagems in this detachment, starting with aggressive mobility. You move 6 when you advance. You don't roll a d6, it's just set at 6. It costs 1 command point and is done, obviously, in your movement phase. This is especially good for Devilfish, as you can disembark after advancing. It basically guarantees you can get to an objective in the midboard turn 1. The Devilfish has the same special rule in the Codex as they did in the Index, and that is a stratagem that can stack well with Combat Debarkation, a battle tactic stratagem for 1 command point. A unit that disembarked this turn can reroll wounds against the closest enemy. Often it is the Tau breachers that go inside transports, and they already reroll wounds 1 or all wound rolls if the enemy is on an objective. It's not bad, but it's not often needed, assuming you're having breachers in your transports. Pinpoint Counteroffensive is a stratagem that can be used at any time, in any phase, and costs 1 command point. 1 Tau Empire unit, but not Kroot, that was just destroyed, so Vespids. Remember that the rules commentary does not let you use stratagems on units that died while battle shocked. But until the end of the battle, the whole battle, Tau Empire, but not Kroot units, can reroll the hit roll against that particular enemy unit. This is very useful for taking down knights or super heavies that are inevitably going to kill at least one of your units. A lot of the Tau already hit on a 4+, with almost army-wide rerolls on one enemy unit. That can be big, but it is not rerolls to wound. It's useful, definitely useful, and it can potentially mean a breacher squad is rerolling all hits and rerolling all wounds. Pulse Onslaught is 2 command points, it's more expensive, and it can't be used on Kroot units. It causes the Shaken effect, which makes an enemy unit -2 to advance or move, and also -2 to charge rolls. This is like being hit by a basilisk, but any Tau infantry can do it. It is a pain for enemies that want to get into combat with you, and on the combat food chain, the Tau are pretty much always at the bottom. This does not work on monsters or vehicles, but that only limits you slightly. The Kauyon has a similar stratagem, and that only costs 1 command point, and it is reactive. Focused Fire is a stratagem that, unsurprisingly, it's a stratagem that the Tau can use in their own shooting phase. I'm glad that Games Workshop knows what this army does. You choose 2 Tau units and 1 enemy unit. Your 2 units get an extra point of armor penetration, but they can only fire at that 1 enemy unit. You do not need to be guided from the greater good. It does not need an extra unit to spot for it. It is just another point of armor penetration from 2 of your units to kill an enemy unit. The limitation is that you can't use this stratagem in the 4th or 5th battle rounds, but would you have 2 units with line of sight on the same enemy unit in the last turn of the game? Maybe. This is the only stratagem with limitations, while there were 2 stratagems with the limitations in the Kauyon detachment. The 6th stratagem is Counter Defense Systems. For 2 command points, you cover your units in ERA the way Imperial Guard could only do with a tank. In the enemy shooting phase, it reduces damage by 1 for the rest of that phase. It comes from battlesuits, but it doesn't have to be used on battlesuits, it is any Tau unit. So it works on vehicles, works on infantry, but aside from characters, Tau infantry have 1 wound anyway, if they're not some kind of battlesuit, even the stealth battlesuits, but damage can't be modified below 1. A lot of damage to attacks coming the way of any of your battlesuit units, it becomes light rain. Well, lighter rain. It doesn't work in combat, and it won't do much to protect your vehicles against the damage 12 of a Shadow Sword. It does have uses, and it will help to keep your nasty battlesuits alive to keep hitting the enemy. So the positives of this detachment. It lets you get in there and cause damage immediately. That is what you want to do, and you are rewarded for it. Tau weapons generally have higher strength than other factions, but if enemy vehicles or monsters are bothering you, lethal hits cause them to be upset. You will want to add armor penetration to the attack, and that is where Focused Fire comes in. You do need 2 units hitting the same one, but against bigger, obvious tanks, that shouldn't be a problem. That detachment rule is probably worth any of the drawbacks. The detachment works well with a lot of different units. There are stratagems for vehicles, for transports, for anyone with a gun, which is all of the Tau units. I can see this being the default Tau detachment that we'll see play. Sure, there will be some specialized list going on with battlesuits or all Kroot for fun, but this packs a punch. There are some drawbacks. You can advance and scout, but you don't have the Kauyon detachment, which has Wall of Mirrors to have units leave the board and come back. In the meta, being able to disappear and then reappear where you're needed is helping a lot of factions to win. For the most part, I find that the stratagems in this detachment cost a little bit more or do basically the same thing as the stratagems in the Kauyon detachment. But I think the detachment special rule tips it in favour of this one is better. Not necessarily for everyone, but generally, as a blanket statement, it's better. I can't think of any other negatives, but if you can, please add them to the comment section to help out other Tau players. this is a strong detachment. The Retaliation Cadre is all about battlesuits. It's not necessarily Farsight, but it's battlesuits. Tau Crisis suits are the focus, so if you love crisis suits and want an army of all crisis battlesuits, not only is that possible now, again, but for this edition, due to the crisis battlesuits being broken up into 3 different units. One of them has melter weapons and a 4+ invulnerable save, another has plasma and missiles and can ignore hit modifiers, and the last kind hates infantry, has burst cannons and or flamers, and they can fall back and shoot. But if you really loved crisis suits, then you may not be happy with these changes. Rather than 3 hard points that could all be weapons, it is reduced to just 2. So unless you use this Legends version of the datasheet, you can't mix plasma rifles and the cyclic ion blasters. In fact, you can't have the cyclic ion blasters outside of the now Legends Crisis Battlesuit unit, the one shown here. That weapon and the air-bursting fragmentation projector only came in the commander kit, and so as Games Workshop makes units match what is in the box, those weapons are not in the codex for anything other than commanders. The detachment rule is a bonus for all battlesuit units, and it is only the battlesuits that get the bonus, not other units. When firing at close range, targeting a unit within 12 inches, improve the strength of the attack by 1, and if you are even closer and within 6 inches, then you also improve the armor penetration of the attack by 1. This encourages your battlesuits to get close to the enemy and not hang back with big cannons and blast away, so it is very much focused on the crisis battlesuits rather than the broadside battlesuits. When coming from deep strike, your crisis battlesuits will be firing and getting an extra strength on their weapons. So imagine strength 5 flamers. Battle Sister players can already imagine that. And strength 6 burst cannons, but really you want to be even closer, and there is a stratagem to help with that. This also works on any drones in the unit, because the drones are essentially holding a gun for a battlesuit model, and they don't count as a model by themselves. So that gives you extra shots that get all the same unit and detachment benefits. And enhancement bonuses as well. All of the enhancements can only be taken by battlesuit models, and remember that from the core rules, you can't give these enhancements to epic heroes like Farsight. He has his own weapon already that we are all very sure is just a demon blade. There is the Star Flare Ignition System. This one lets you get off the board with a unit and back into strategic reserves. Great! Take it! I'm going to be repeating how powerful one particular stratagem is, and this is going to give you another shot at it. It also lets you get where you need to be, to take open objectives, to complete secondary objectives, and to get out of problematic situations. But you can't do this if you were in engagement range. The prototype weapon systems make all of the weapons on the model have either lethal hits or sustained hits, your choice. Since you can't have the Mont'ka or the Kauyon detachments, this gives you a little bit of the bonuses of both. It lets your weapons deal with a lot of light infantry or vehicles a bit better. It is only the bearer and not their unit, but it has good use if it's cheap enough. The internal grenade racks gives you the grenade keyword for even more damage available from spending command points, and you can use them in a way without spending that command point. Each time you make a normal move, and it has to be a normal move, not an advanced move, select one enemy you moved over and roll 6d6. Every 4+ is a mortal wound. That is just like the grenade stratagem, but flying over them then doesn't stop you from using the grenade stratagem in the shooting phase. I like it, but if I had a choice, and you do have a choice because you can only have one enhancement on a model, I prefer the Star Flare system. But that's just my way of playing. I'm a Gene Stealer cult player. Disappear off the board, come back on later. The Pure Tide Engram Neurochip is back. It fell out of Kauyon and into this detachment, and of course it isn't the only thing to come over. The enhancement means that once per turn you can use a stratagem even if another unit has already used it this phase. It doesn't reduce the cost of it. As it does not specify a stratagem by name or a kind of stratagem, then this means it'll only work on battle tactic stratagems. There is only one battle tactic in this detachment, and it is a better way of getting sustained hits than the prototype weapon system because a stratagem affects a unit, not just the bearer. I'm going to start with that stratagem, and that will help you decide if the neurochip is worth it. The Arokan protocol gives a battlesuit keyword unit sustained hits 1 against an enemy unit with 6+ models, or you get sustained hits 2 against an enemy unit with 11+ models. Because of these limitations, it is focused on being used on a unit of Star Scythe Crisis Battlesuits and appropriate commander. The battlesuits would have 2 burst cannons each, but hordes will disappear from this, and a little luck to roll some 6s. The Star Scythe battlesuits get an extra point of armor penetration against units that are not monsters or vehicles, so with this stratagem, you have loads of shots at a good strength and with some armor penetration. It is bug spray. It clears orcs. And don't forget that if you are close to them, then you get an additional point of strength, and even closer, you get an additional point of armor penetration from the detachment rule. This is great for counterattacking or coming straight out from deep strike. And there's a really cool stratagem that will guarantee that you get an extra point of armor penetration from the detachment rule. The shortened blade stratagem. Like all of the stratagems in this detachment, it is limited to battlesuit units only. When you arrive from deep strike, you can be a minimum of 3 inches away instead of the minimum of 9 inches away as per normal from deep strike and reserves. This is why I want the Starflare ignition system, to keep coming back and using this. As it is not a battle tactic, it can't be done a second time with the neurochip enhancement. The September 2023 balance patch sorted that. The drawback is the cost of 2 command points. That is quite hefty in 10th edition, but there is more going on here than at first glance. The fact that it's in the Retaliation Cadre detachment is what makes it so good. Let's take a look at the Star Scythe battlesuits. Now they're guaranteed to be within 6 inches, though do note that the detachment rule is on a per model basis, not per unit basis, so placement of those big bases can matter in narrow corridors. Now their burst cannons are strength 6, wounding Orc infantry on a 3+, wounding Imperial Guard platoons on a 2+. You have the 1 point of armor penetration from the detachment rule, which stacks with the Star Scythe battlesuit unit rule, and now you are -2 armor penetration. That is halving the save of a Space Marine, and it removes the save entirely from those Imperial Guard and Orcs. This is the Horde Eraser, but it's not just for hordes. What if you aren't facing a horde and are against tanks and monsters? The Sunforge battlesuits come in. Their guns are now AP -5. They go up to strength 10, which lets you wound a lot of monsters and vehicles on a 3+ or a 4+. Strength 10 is the sweet spot for anti-tank. The unit gets rerolls to wound against monsters and vehicles, that also helps, and more, the unit is within half range. You reroll damage against vehicles and monsters, but against them and everything else, you also do 2 more points of damage because you're in melter range. So your battlesuit units can be safe in deep strike reserves, and then come in and perform immediately at their best. That is better than waiting in your deployment zone before striking, where a slight miscalculation or active calculation on the part of your opponent can rob you of part of the detachment bonus. Maybe you only use this stratagem once per game. Perhaps you see that it can be amazing and you save those command points to do it more than once. Once on a unit in turn 2, once on a unit in turn 3. We have other good stratagems to use our command points on. The Torchstar Gambit, the stratagem formerly known as Strike and Fade. It has less of an Eldar name now. It is 1 command point for a battlesuit unit with the fly keyword that is fired. All the same restrictions as before. You can't do it with a broadside battlesuit unit after it is shot, but the big Riptide, that can fly, it is a battlesuit, that can use the stratagem. All its stats and rules and weapon options look the same in the Codex as in the Index. So it gets to shoot, it hides behind cover. This stratagem keeps your battlesuit units moving, it keeps them safe, or after coming from reserve and killing an enemy on an objective, shortened blade or not, probably not unless you do have loads of command points, then you can move onto that objective and claim it. You'll be 9 inches away from the enemy. A normal move is taking place. Crisis battlesuits move 10 inches. You should be able to get onto an empty objective after that. Stim injectors is the other stratagem that moved from the Kauyon detachment in the Index to this detachment in the Codex. In the enemy shooting phase or either player's fight phase, you get a 6+ feel no pain on a battlesuit unit. Having faced something similar to this many times in the Tyranid Invasion Fleet detachment, I can tell you that a 6+ is rarely good enough. If your really big battlesuit, like the Riptide, is about to get absolutely battered, it can be just enough to save them. But most of the time, for a 6+, I think it's a trap to try it. I would save the command points for failsafe detonator. So if D6 mortal wounds from a potentially exploding Riptide would lose you an objective, because it's going to kill the models that are nearby, this lets you roll a 1 and deliberately not blow up. Or you can purposefully roll a 6 and intentionally blow up to hurt the enemy more. This will work on any battlesuit unit. If your model does not already have deadly demise, like the stealth suits or the crisis battlesuits, then when the model dies, and this is just one model, not every model in the unit, On a 4+, each enemy unit within 6 inches of the dead model takes D3 mortal wounds. Now I believe that this is another trap. On a big battlesuit with a large explosion, good. On the smaller battlesuits, you are spending 2 command points to hope to roll a 4+. If I was using this detachment and I had 2 command points, in most circumstances, I'll be trying to figure out how to use the shortened blade again. The grav inhibitor field is 1 command point. It is not quite a stratagem to stop enemy charges. It makes the charging enemy take a battle shock test, and for every model in the enemy unit, you roll a dice. On a 6, they take a mortal wound. I don't think you will be able to make this worth the mortal wounds. If there are 20 enemy models charging, average is 3 mortal wounds. As those 20 models are likely to be a chaff horde unit of some kind, it is not a lot of value compared to causing mortal wounds to Terminators or tanks using a stratagem like grenades. Against the chaff units, I would only use this if they had charged a Tau battlesuit unit on an objective because they were trying to take it from you using their objective control bodies. If you die, you lose the objective anyway, so the enemy would have to be weak, not able to kill you, and have a poor leadership to risk failing the battle shock test. That is quite a specific situation for it to work. I wouldn't bother. But I like half the stratagems in this detachment. The positives are this works with Crisis Battlesuits. It is a strong detachment and it can hit really hard. Deploying right next to the enemy with the perfect gun to eliminate that enemy is great. Having seen it many times with the power of Acolyte demo charges, enemies will feel that pain. If you're going to go very heavy on Crisis Battlesuits, then you save yourself from a lot of enemy firepower. Their light anti-infantry guns will do not a lot to your toughness 5 and many wounds. Enemies need to pull out a lot of anti-tank weapons to counter you, and your units have the speed to get in, damage the tanks, then get out and get where they need to be. The drawback is the Eldar problem, if we can call it that, or maybe the Primaris Space Marine problem, but that is a lot of problems related to it anyway. The problem is highly specialized units that struggle to work against other enemy units. 2 plasma rifles on a Crisis Battlesuit will not bother guard infantry, and no amount of flamer attacks will upset knights, even at strength 5 and AP -2. You can't really run with just battlesuits. You will want some support units as well, if only to have some Kroot Hounds to complete secondary actions, and some of whatever the cheapest infantry unit ends up being in the new Codex points to hold objectives. Every one of these units you have is not getting the benefit of the detachment rule or the stratagems, and I think you will want other units. There is no stratagem to make an objective sticky, and you want your battlesuits of all kinds to be going to work, not necessarily holding objectives. I can suggest the stealth suits as your grunts. They have the battlesuit keyword, so can benefit from the detachment rules, and they're cheap enough to have value even while holding objectives. They can guide your bigger battlesuits using the greater good, but you only get 3 of them with objective control 1 for nearly the same cost as 10 fire warriors in a strike team, each model with objective control 2. And it's going to depend on the enemy you're against as to how effective your battlesuit tactics are. Against vehicle armies and elite armies, the battlesuit strikes can hurt, but if you're facing a horde and they have counter-attacking units and backup units and spare units, you are attacking from very close to them, and even the battlesuits do not enjoy combat. You will have to learn to hit the enemy on the flank and rely on your speed to get to the next target. I don't think this is going to be a very good beginner detachment, but it looks to have a pretty high skill ceiling for experienced players and plenty of tactics to try out. And then there's the Kroot Hunting Pack, a totally new detachment, the one people wanted to know the most about, I think. It's the new one, the all Kroot, no blue boys allowed detachment. Though you can still take fire warriors and all the other units, just now the Tau have become the auxiliaries. Kroot get a good detachment rule, but it only works on the Kroot units. Nothing else. +1 to hit, both shooting and combat, against enemies that are below starting strength, and an additional +1 to wound if the target is below half strength. Kind of the reverse of the Hallowed Martyrs Sisters of Battle detachment. That is good, but most of the time, like vast majority of the time, you will only be getting that +1. Often enemy units are wiped out rather than going below half strength. I play Deathwatch where one kill team has a bonus if the enemy is below half strength. It rarely comes up, and I play Sisters of Battle, and it is rare for my units to go below half strength without also being destroyed. But there's more to this. It's not just the bonus to hit. The Kroot get a save! The regular Kroot carnivores have a 6+ armor save, and the bigger Krootox type creatures like the Rampagers have a 5+ save. So getting an invulnerable save is always an improvement. A 6+ invulnerable save against melee attacks for all Kroot units, and a 5+ invulnerable save against shooting attacks. There is yet more. Because this is designed as an all Kroot army, carnivores are battle line units, so you can take 6 of them units. Do you like Kroot? If you're even looking at this detachment, then I think you like Kroot. The enhancements that are available. Now these are just for Kroot units, not other Tau. So while in the other detachments, no, not for Shapers, no. These are only for Shapers. The Kroot Hawk Flock is for a Kroot model only. It gives the ranged weapons equipped by models in the bearer's unit ignores cover. And it also prevents enemy units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements from being set up within 12 inches of the bearer. Ignores cover on the ranged weapons isn't amazing because the Kroot want to do combat, so having ignores cover only, that's not the important part. So I would consider putting this enhancement on the Lone Spear. That is a character that has Lone Operative. You could keep them back on the home objective, but considering the Blast Javelin you maybe would want them rushing into the enemy. But keeping them on the home objective means that they can't be shot within 12 inches, and enemies can't deep strike within 12 inches, so that is a very safe model to hold that home objective. An alternative to having the Lone Spear holding the home objective is just to start one Kroot unit there. They have the Fieldcraft ability which gives them sticky objectives, so you can start there and then move out. The Nomadic Hunter enhancement is for Trail Shapers only, that's the regular Shaper you may remember. It gives you 3 inches of additional movement. And all of your ranged weapons have Assault, so this is for a unit that wants to be whipping round the board. Since you already have Scouts on the Kroot, they're probably fast enough as long as you can get far enough up the board. It's going to depend entirely on the points of it. It's a maybe, but the advantages of Assault just lets you advance and still shoot. There is no advance and charge, and I would always be thinking, how am I going to get the Kroot into combat? They do better in combat than at shooting. While you can't advance and charge, being able to move 10 inches with a Kroot unit, and then shoot normally, and then charge afterwards, with Scout included, that's likely to get you a first turn charge. The root-carved weapons are just for the War Shaper. It gives your weapons precision and devastating wounds. You're going to want this only if you have a Shaper with Dart Bow and Tri-Blade, because that is anti-infantry 3+. Combine that with devastating wounds and now you go straight through the save of any enemy infantry and do 2 damage per strike. The Kroot generally lack armor penetration. The Dart Bow and Tri-Blade is AP 0. The alternative, the Blade Stave and Prey Hook, it has lethal hits at AP -1, but you'd only be doing devastating wounds on a 6 with that. So this is the enhancement for if you want a Kroot Warshaper to be throwing dart blades around and killing enemy characters. So it turns that Kroot into not so much a leader, but more of an assassin. The Borthrod Gland is for a Flesh Shaper only, so we have an enhancement that can be for each of the different kinds of on-foot Shaper, plus a general one. This enhancement means that sustained hits will trigger on a 5+. Because the Kroot have no armor penetration, you need to take down enemies with weight of attacks. That's the only way the Kroot Carnivores are going to get through the armor save of superior elite enemies. And this is doubling the number of sustained hits you're going to get, from 1 in 6 to 2 out of 6. It's now on a 5+. The stratagems. Hidden Hunters is a stratagem you use in your opponent's shooting phase, just after the enemy has selected its targets. One Kroot unit from your army that was selected as the target of the attack cannot be targeted unless they're within 12 inches. Under the rules commentary, this means that they can now reassign and pick a different target. But this is any Kroot unit, so you could use it on a Kroot Rampager unit. The heavy guns of the enemy will then have to point at something else. If you don't have any other tanks or any other Krootox kind of models, then their heavy tanks are going to be firing at regular Kroot, which have stealth. Even with stealth and an invulnerable save from this detachment, the Kroot will still go down very quickly because that invulnerable save is very low and the toughness of Kroot is very low at toughness 3. Any kind of bullets coming their way will take them out. So you'll also want more Kroot. Join the Hunt is 2 command points and it is basically the same as the Imperial Guard reinforcement stratagem. 1 Kroot infantry or Kroot Hout units, so not the Rampagers, that has just been destroyed, gets put into strategic reserves as a identical duplicate unit at its starting strength. As with the reinforcement stratagem, this doesn't return any destroyed characters to the attached unit. So hang on, the Kroot can return units to the board, and they have a stratagem to hide in the shadows. Are we sure these are not just gene stealers? having Kroot fight a Genestealer cult would be a very good matchup, because there are otherwise not a lot of factions that play remotely like the Genestealer cult. If your Kroot get involved in a combat, and that's any Kroot unit again, not just the Kroot carnivores, they can fall back and shoot and charge. So doing this with your Krootoxes that have a bigger gun, they can shoot at whatever they want, and then they can charge back in, and when you charge, you fight first. I've seen stratagems like this really underused, because when you fall back, you're not just able to shoot with that unit that fell back, all of your other units that are in the area can also now target that enemy unit. And if you don't want that enemy unit, if they survive, to be shooting at one of your units, that's where you can charge back in and tie them up. And if they haven't got a stratagem or ability of their own that lets them do this, that enemy unit will not be shooting. Against vehicles, the Kroot have EMP grenades, but these don't do damage. They inconvenience the enemy. It's in the shoot phase or the fight phase, it's vehicles only, not monsters, and it worsens the weapon skill and ballistic skill of that enemy vehicle by 1. If they were already bracketed, so they were at -1 to hit compared to their normal weapon skill or ballistic skill anyway, this could compound the issue. But if we're within 8 inches and we have a unit that has the grenades keyword, I would want to be throwing grenades. If the enemy is dead, it doesn't matter how much they're inconvenienced. They're dead. A trap well laid, I think, is the most important Kroot stratagem because it deals with one of their weaknesses. It works in the shooting phase or the fight phase. One of your Kroot units attacks an enemy unit, then all of the rest of the Kroot units from your army get an extra point of armor penetration when they're shooting or fighting against that unit, as long as the attacking unit is not battle shocked. So if there's an enemy unit that you're struggling to deal with, because they're a Custodes unit and your weight of attacks are not going to get through their 2+ save, this gives you at least 1 point of armor penetration. So those Custodes are no longer failing on a 1 in 6 time, they're failing in a 2 in 6 time, doubling the amount of damage you're doing. The drawback is it will require at least 2 units, and ideally you want more than 2 units to make the best advantage of it. But considering the relative cheapness of Kroot carnivores compared to all of the other factions' infantry, you should have multiple units available to do this. You can think of it as your version of the greater good. And finally there's the Grizzly Feast. So if you've just charged in and killed an enemy unit near an objective, but you didn't claim the objective because there were other enemy units nearby, this will allow you to force them to take a battleshock test in their command phase. And if that enemy unit is below half strength, they're at -1 to the test. But they don't need to make multiple battleshock tests in that phase. It can be just enough to swing an objective to your control. Because the battleshock test is being taken in the enemy command phase, it is much better than special abilities, like the one the Patriarch has, that causes you to take a battleshock test in the combat phase, because enemies will have recovered from their battleshock at the start of the next turn. This makes sure that they are scared when it matters, when the objectives are being scored. I would definitely use it, but for the situation, it relies on the enemy not having a great leadership, it relies on them having a larger objective control than the units you've got around the objective, but alternatively, if you've got a lot of enemies nearby to you, you could do it after you've destroyed an enemy, because then every failed battleshock test is 1 less unit that can use stratagems of their own. It's situational, but it's usable.
Follow me, and we shall all be strong.
A Kroot army, and that's what you're going to have if you're using this detachment, has quite a lot of advantages. They're going to have a lot of models. They're going to be able to scout with everything. And if you have 1 unit of Kroot carnivores holding back on your home objective, with the Fieldcraft rule, that's your objective from the start of the game. Then you can be moving up with everything. If the Crisis Suit Retaliation Cadre only had 1 unit to deal effectively with hordes, this is an army that can deal with hordes because it is a horde. Defeating infantry will not be a problem. So in forced disposition, it is very much the opposite of the Retaliation Cadre. If you're going for an army that is all Kroot, you're really lacking an anti-tank, apart from the Lone Spear with their 1 grenade bomb spear. So I would still include some big tanks, like a Hammerhead, that's totally allowed. The Kroot are not their own separate faction with their own separate codex. It's just 1 detachment within the army. But if you include other units from the Tau Codex, they can't benefit from stratagems or the detachment rule. But Tau units that can operate alone without support, such as the Ghost Keel, that can be a very good choice. A Fusion Collider and Twin Fusion Blaster can give you some anti-tank support, and because that unit has lone operative, enemies can't hurt it without getting into melter range. And this is indeed a horde army. You may have stealth and invulnerable saves, but you have a very low save and a toughness of 3. That's even more fragile than regular Tau infantry. You will have to put your toughness reliance on the big rampages. Oh, they have toughness. They're toughness 6 with 5 wounds. Only their weak save lets them down. But you have to keep them safe. They don't have stealth, so that is where the stratagem, Hidden Hunters, is most valuable for that unit. We don't know how expensive they are, but they are quite low speed for mounted units. Despite them hitting hard and being tough, they still need protection because if you don't take battlesuits or tank support, all of the enemy guns that specialize in killing large targets will be pointed at them. Armor penetration is going to be the biggest problem for the Kroot. They get a decent number of attacks, and with the detachment special rule, you'll often be hitting on a 3+ at range or a 2+ in combat. But if the enemy units are elite, like Space Marines, you really need a lot of attacks to take one down. And against Custodes, you're more relying on the Custodes not having enough attacks to kill all of your Kroot models. So being able to set up a trap well laid is going to be very important just to get that armor penetration. Otherwise, you're relying more heavily on regular Tau units, in which case those are not getting the detachment benefit. The other side of that, if your army is all Kroot, you have a good detachment rule that will help you, but you completely miss out on the army rule. The Kroot units do not have for the greater good, on their unit card. You are still technically playing a Tau army. Now you're sacrificing your army rule to play something that isn't Tau while trying to be Tau. From a more competitive standpoint, the Kroot support the Tau better than the Tau Empire supports the Kroot, but I can see this detachment just being a lot of fun. A lot of people like the idea of an all-Kroot army. Now it's possible. We don't know in future editions if it's going to be possible again. This may be a, oh, you buy it once, it's really cool for a bit, and then Games Workshop changes the rules, so you can't have an army of all Kroot. Or they may end up just getting their own codex by themselves, shoved off there. That's a possible business strategy because Tau players that have some Kroot units will then be encouraged to expand their little bit of Kroot into a full-on Kroot army. It's a possibility you have to consider, but it looks fun. And if you like the Kroot and the way they play, maybe I can interest you in some Genestealer Cult? It's a very similar play style, and I do quite a lot of videos about Genestealer Cult, not so much Tau. Please let me know which detachment you think is the best, and if I got anything wrong, please also put it in the comments so that other people can look through and see what needs to be corrected. And I will wish you to have a great day for the greater good.